Kings of the Universe is a fantasy anthology podcast, and therefore may contain material not suitable for all audiences, so listener discretion is advised. In my first campaign, I marched against Magan, Meluha, Tahaka, king of Egypt and Ethiopia, whom Esarhaddon, king of Assyria, the father who begot me, had defeated, and whose land brought under his sway. The same Tahaka forgot the might of Ashur, Ishtar, and the other great gods, my lords, and put his trust upon his own power. He turned against the kings and regents whom my father had appointed in Egypt. He entered and took residence in Memphis, the city which my own father had conquered and incorporated into Assyrian territory. Haharu was given funeral rites befitting a king. He was given a small ceremony en route to Rezu before his body was taken back to the capital. His son, Aki-ya, donned the royal crown and battle vestments, a scale armor tunic and breeches, a dyed linen skirt, and the royal jewels. He looked at the witch doctors impassively, those that had failed to keep his father alive until after the campaign was over. They each pleaded for some sense of mercy or leniency, begging that the gods would find some way to intervene and save their lives. They had done all they could to prolong the old king's life, but his shade had left his body before the incantations were spoken. My father trusted you with his life, more than he trusted his own generals, and you failed in your sworn duty to prevent his death. Aki-ya sneered, scowling at the pitiful doctors knelt before him. By my right as your new king, I will pass judgment on your failings. Aki-ya stood in silence for a few moments. Each of the doctors stood, frozen in fear, as they waited for their divine punishment or reward. Aki-ya's voice broke the lingering silence. As punishment for your failure, 2 of you will be put to death. 1 will be spared. Aki-ya held out a hand to one of his guards, who placed a sword in his hand. The iron blade clattered between the 3 doctors, the echo reverberating in the king's tent. 1 sword between the 3 of you should be more than sufficient. Figure out who is going to live, and make it fast. Take too long, and I will have you all flayed alive, and I will use your strips of flesh to string my boots. Aki-ya smirked as the doctors dove for the blade, the sound of their struggles growing louder as one took the pommel of the sword to the lip, breaking it and shattering a few teeth. The second took hold of the blade and swung. The blow grazed against the unprotected flesh of the 3rd doctor. Pained screams assaulted the onlookers' ears as the man tried in vain to keep his organs inside of his body. Aki-ya stood, facing one of his guards. Burn the corpses of those that lack the devotion to keep their pitiful lives. Make sure that everyone knows that failure will not be tolerated, and obedience and loyalty are expected. The sound of the fighting grew dim as he entered his personal quarters. Gods help the other 2 doctors. I should have flayed all 3 of them for failing my father in his hour of need. He snapped his fingers and a slave approached, offering him a jug of beer. Be gone with you. I wish to be alone with my thoughts. He waved a hand dismissively as he drank from the jug. The beer was sweet and earthy, the flavor of date palms lingering on his tongue for a moment before he renewed the sensation.
Such a ruthless ruler.
A voice echoed in the back of his mind. He didn't flinch, but merely nodded in acknowledgement of the being speaking to him.
Not all kings would handle such failure as effectively as you have. You have the makings of a fine warrior king.
You tell me things that are obvious, demon, Aki-ya said as he took another deep drink of beer. Why are you here? Of what use could one as powerful as yourself have with me? The voice chuckled, the rumbling of a thunderstorm reverberating in his mind.
Think of it.
The voice whispered.
All the kingdoms of the land could be under your guidance. All knees could bow to your visage. If you only kneel to me.
Aki-ya thought for a moment. All the lands under my dominion. A very tempting offer. I could rule over a kingdom larger than Fairylands. How do I know that I could trust your word, spirit? Making deals with the supernatural is dark dealings, saved only for the priesthood and high-ranking scribes. If the voice had a form, it would have smiled.
Your words are true. But were you not a royal scribe before your gods made you the heir to your father's throne?
The voice twisted around his mind like a serpent, fangs bare as it moved to strike. Surely, one such as yourself knows that the world would be better under a single ruler. There was a sickly sweetness to the voice.
If you were not interested, I suppose your brother would be better suited for the task.
Aki-ya shook his head. Nonsense. My brother might be my elder, but he is nothing more than a client king to keep the peace while I am gone. Aki-ya sighed. His mind racked with all the possibilities of aligning with this spirit. Spirit, let me prove myself worthy of your boon in the coming battle. My armies and I seek to right the wrongs against my father and his shade. Let me deal with them, and we will discuss this agreement of ours after. Silence was the only answer. No laughing, no attempt to push him into the pact sooner. There was just nothing. Aki-ya stood alone in his tent, the voice now gone. The screams from the healers had long since stopped, and a pair of pyres stood ignited in the middle of the encampment. So it's gone then, he thought, laying on his reed mat. Good. Best not to deal with spirits when tired. I will talk to that spirit soon enough, I am sure. He spent the next several hours thinking of battle strategies and troop organizations before sleep finally claimed him. He awoke at dawn the next morning. The sound of footfalls throughout the camp told him that his men were preparing the attack. As he wore his own pleated leather battle skirt and scale mail shirt, his mind started to wonder what the spirit had told him the night before. Could he really successfully pull off this invasion? Did he need some sort of otherworldly intervention, or would his troops be enough? He put on the royal headdress and showed those lingering doubts to the back of his mind. Those thoughts would get him and his men killed. No, he had to be strong for them. If he started to falter, then the battle was already lost. Aki-ya walked through the front lines of his army. 50,000 lancers stood at attention, their iron spears gleaming in the morning sunlight, thirsty for the blood of the heretics. 50,000 slingers stood ready, their pouches filled with stones of various sizes. 25,000 archers stood ready, their quivers packed full of iron arrows, ready to turn the enemy into pincushions. Another 25,000 chariot men stood ready with bows and lances, their horses neighing in anticipation. The last 10,000 men were Aki-ya's pride and joy, his battle mages, an elite group of priests that used their gods-given gifts of elemental manipulation for the advancement of the kingdom. They carried a satchel of clay with various incantations and spells, along with their other reagents, to enhance or give the enemy army a substantial disadvantage. The army broke camp and continued the march to Nimru, the sparse desert slowly fading into a lush, fertile landscape. Palm trees dated the horizon as herons and other native birds took flight at the sight of the approaching army. The few villages they had encountered offered no resistance. The few villages that tried to stand against the divine wrath of Aki-ya and his forces were put to the torch. His mages made quick work of the reed huts, hurling balls of fire toward the lodgings before his lancers and archers picked off any that survived. It was on the morning of the 12th day of the trip that the city of Nimru came into view. The city was resplendent. Limestone walls surrounded the city with guard towers posted equal distance apart. Large reed doors were tightly shut in an attempt to keep Aki-ya and his forces outside of the walls. It would be beautiful if they hadn't shrugged off the yoke of my father, Aki-ya thought as his army pressed forward. They will know the price of their disobedience. When they reached a safe distance, Aki-ya raised his hand, and his mages readied their spells. Shimmers of brown light surrounded his mages, waves of earthen magics increasing in size and volume. Several mages tried to utter protest, but their concentration wavered and their protests were stifled for the time being. With this, let them know the full might of my army. Aki-ya lowered his hand, and the mages slammed their fists to the ground. Fissures swelled under the earth. Tremors and earth-breaking rolled towards the city like a hurricane, each fissure seeking their target. The sound of war horns filled the air as they struck, toppling a guard tower and a portion of the wall. The armies of Nimru scrambled towards the battlefield. Arrows came raining down from the other towers, still standing. But they were no match for Aki-ya and his army. His slingers grabbed their stones and let loose a volley of falling earth and stone. His lancers and other infantry pushed towards the ruined wall, engaging with the opposing army. Aki-ya himself rode on a war chariot, firing a barrage of arrows at the enemy infantry. The gods made his aim true, and each arrow found their mark. The mages read their magical tablets. Strings of red magic swirled around their bodies, reaching their hands until they extended their palms. The resulting firebolts crashed against the unprotected huts of villagers, the reeds igniting in an orange blaze that sent the non-combatants scrambling for safety. Another volley of arrows pierced through some of the unlucky civilians, killing most of them instantly. Aki-ya surveyed the carnage around him, the Rezu army breaking ranks with the sheer might of his army. He basked in the power of his forces before a horse neighed loudly, dashing away from the field. Their king, I presume, he thought, knocking an arrow and pulling the string taut. Let's see if he can actually escape. The arrow hurled towards the target, the rider's shoulder. Aki-ya hoped to knock him off his horse. A gust of wind sent the arrow off course slightly. The arrow found a mark, sinking deep into the thigh of the rider. A scream drowned out the panicked cry of his forces. The rider still held on to the reins. His horse sped on, out of the fray, and into the safety of the outskirts of the city. Teshu Emba, the king of the Rezu, divine son and protector of Rezu, groaned as his horse galloped away from the battle. The initial searing pain of the arrowhead biting into his flesh had faded, leaving only a smoldering pain whenever his horse ran too fast or over a rough patch of the oasis. Nimru has fallen, he seized, cursing his misfortune. The gods have forsaken Minru, but I will find succor in a new city. Name my heir, and they will continue with my struggle. Teshu Emba rode his horse to exhaustion, leaving the poor creature on the ground as he limped to the city of Mizum. His heart leapt when he saw the city walls untouched by the foul mages of Aki-ya's forces. His muscles burned and his legs screamed for him to stop. The arrow wound openly wept. A foul stench assaulted his nose. Teshumba was dying, and he knew it. The gods saw their king stagger to the gates, and had the good sense to take him to the city temple so the priests could treat his wounds. He writhed in agony as the infection from the arrow spread from his legs to his lungs. Each raspy breath felt like breathing in acrid smoke. The local priest had given him an elixir to dull the pain, but the chalky substance did little. "Fetch me papyrus and a quill," he rasped as he struggled to sit upright. Teshu Emba might shed off this mortal coil, but his grievances with Aki-ya and his cursed kingdom would not die with him. When the priest gave him the papyrus and the well of ink, he quickly etched a message for his son and heir, Eneb. "My son, by the time this letter is delivered, I will have died. The man who claimed my life is none other than the king of the Etlini people, Aki-ya. After a mourning period, my son, you must bring Aki-ya to his knees. Never let him forget that we are a strong people and will resist any attempts at subjugation. Go now with the favor of the gods, and know that I will wait for you in the afterlife." King Teshu Emba gave his message to one of the priests. "Give this to my son, Eneb, with all haste. Our people must not become subjects to this outsider." The infection took a firm hold on Teshu Emba the following days. Rancid pus wept openly and freely from the arrow wound. His legs had grown swollen and inflamed. The day he passed, a priest had gone to give him his breakfast. The poor man would never recover from the sight of swollen joints, pus-filled sacks, and blowflies resting on his motionless corpse. Aki-ya stood in the damaged city, watching proudly as his army gathered the rest of the civilians and cut down those who carried spears or bow against him. "This is the splendor of my majesty," he thought, watching as his generals gave the orders for beheading those who would not submit to his rule. "Let those who would attempt to run from my grip fall into non-existence." The screams and wails of the captives were music to his ears. The might of his army and the favor of his gods were all he needed. He was the greatest king in the land. He would conquer the world from horizon to sky, and he would stand at the center of a kingdom that would last for millennia. There was something tugging at the back of his mind, something that troubled him. It wasn't guilt or remorse for what he had his troops do. This was the way of things. Conquer or be conquered, and to make his subjects so terrified that rebellion was not an option. So what was bothering him? The realization about the rider he'd shot as the battle ended came into his mind. What if he hadn't died? What if he's able to rally a larger army for a counterattack? Was this a mistake? Paranoia slithered its fingers around his thoughts before a voice rang into his mind.
"You have done well, Aki-ya. Your prowess is without rival. And yet you let the man you came to kill slip through your fingers."
The voice was all too familiar. That sickly sweet voice from before the battle, but with the addition of a slightly condescending tone, like as a parent speaking down to their child.
You are a formidable warrior and king, but you are still mortal and prone to making mistakes. What will your subjects think if they know you cannot be ruthless?
The voice chuckled, a rolling thunderstorm in his mind.
Pledge yourself to me, and I will make sure that your subjects will never forget your ruthlessness. Those that try to rebel against you will be crushed like the insects that they are.
Aki-ya thought on the words of the spirit, reveling in the fear and cruelty of his army. Anyone that would challenge me would be crushed? He asked the spirit, who muttered in agreement. Very well. You have a pact, spirit. I, Aki-ya, will do what you ask of me in exchange for crushing all that would oppose me for the rest of my days. A sudden cold enveloped Aki-ya, the whites of his eyes filling with a dark ichor. As he tried to blink away at the stinging in his eyes, a figure manifested before him. It had the body of a man, lean and muscular, but the face constantly shifted. One moment it was a lion, the next a wolf, a hawk, and then a serpent. When it changed into what looked like a humanoid face, he could not tell if it was human, orc, troll, elf, or dwarf, or if it was even male or female. When it finally spoke, it had a variety of tongues and animal calls.
I am your new lord, Zulma.
The figure said, its eyes shifting into the serpent's.
This vessel is the only suitable choice for your mortal eyes. No need, you needn't go mad seeing my true form. Take my hand, and together we shall rule this world.
Kings of the Universe was written and performed by Matthew Jordan. Editing and sound mixing by the illustrious Tommy Lee. As always, if you have any questions about the show or my sources, feel free to email me at kingsoftheuniversepod@gmail.com. Don't forget to rate, like, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.